You think you are a pretty good driver. Not great necessarily, but better than average, better than most of the people on the road with you right now. You have probably never even questioned that assumption. It just feels true. Here is the problem. So does everyone else. In study after study, across dozens of countries and cultures, roughly 80 to 90% of people rate themselves as above average drivers, which is mathematically impossible. Half of all drivers are below average by definition. The other half are above. That is what average means. And yet almost nobody places themselves in the bottom half. Not because they are lying, because they genuinely cannot tell. That gap between how competent you think you are and how competent you actually are has a name. And once you understand it, you will start seeing it everywhere, in your workplace, in your family, in the mirror, in the people who are most confident that they have all the answers. It is called the Kruger Effect, and it says something about your brain that will make you deeply uncomfortable, and then, if you let it, genuinely wiser. In 1999, a man named MacArthur Wheeler was arrested for robbing two banks in Pittsburgh in broad daylight. He had not worn a disguise. He had not hidden his face. He walked in, robbed the banks, and walked out, in full view of the security cameras, apparently believing he was invisible. When detectives showed him the footage, he stared at it in disbelief. He had rubbed lemon juice on his face before the robbery. He had heard that lemon juice could be used as invisible ink, and he concluded, with complete confidence, that it would make his face invisible to cameras as well. Wheeler was not insane. He was not intoxicated. He was simply catastrophically wrong about something he was equally certain he was right about. When psychologist David Dunning at Cornell University heard about the Wheeler case, he was not amused. He was fascinated. Because Wheeler's problem was not stupidity in the traditional sense, it was something more specific, something more unsettling. Wheeler lacked the knowledge required to do the thing he was trying to do, and he also lacked the knowledge required to know that he lacked it. The same gap in understanding that made him incompetent also made him blind to his own incompetence. Dunning took this idea to his graduate student Justin Kruger, and together they ran a series of experiments that would permanently change how psychology thinks about human self-assessment. They tested college students on logical reasoning, grammar, and humor. They asked each student to rate their own performance before seeing their actual results. The findings were striking. Students who scored in the bottom quarter consistently estimated that they had performed better than average, sometimes far better. They did not just overestimate themselves slightly, they overestimated themselves dramatically, placing themselves in the 62nd percentile on average when they actually scored in the 12th. But here is the part most people miss when they hear about this study. The students who scored in the top quarter made the opposite error. They underestimated themselves. They assumed the test had been easy for everyone, that their peers had done just as well, and they rated their performance lower than it actually was. High competence came paired with high uncertainty. Low competence came paired with total confidence. Dunning and Kruger published their findings in 1999 under a title that became famous, Unskilled and Unaware of It. The paper went on to win an Ig Nobel Prize, the award given for research that first makes you laugh, then makes you think, and the more you think about it, the less funny it becomes. Your brain does not come equipped with an accurate self-assessment meter. It never has. What it comes equipped with is a self-assessment meter built from the tools it already has, which means that when those tools are limited, the meter is limited too. You cannot use knowledge you do not have to evaluate the quality of knowledge you do not have. It is like trying to proofread a document in a language you cannot read. You will look at it, see symbols, and have no idea whether it is brilliant or nonsense. This is not a character flaw. It is a cognitive architecture problem, and it affects every human being on the planet, including the ones who know about it. Including you, right now, reading this. Think about the last time you sat in a meeting and watched someone speak with tremendous authority about something they clearly did not fully understand. The certainty in their voice, the lack of hesitation, the way they looked almost offended when anyone questioned them. That person was not performing confidence. They felt it. The Dunning-Kruger effect does not produce fake confidence. It produces real confidence built on a foundation of incomplete information. And this is where the research gets particularly uncomfortable for modern life, because the domains where the effect is strongest are exactly the domains where the stakes are highest. Medical self-diagnosis, financial decision-making, political judgment, parenting, leadership. These are the areas where people are most likely to have just enough exposure to feel informed, a few articles read, a few conversations had, a few personal experiences cataloged, and nowhere near enough depth to understand what they are actually missing. Psychologist Philip Tetlock spent 2 decades studying political forecasters and found that the people most confident in their predictions were consistently the least accurate. The experts who acknowledged complexity, who hedged their bets, who expressed genuine uncertainty, they outperformed the confident ones by a significant margin. Certainty, it turned out, was almost perfectly inversely correlated with accuracy. The people who were sure they knew what was going to happen were the most reliably wrong. But here is the counterintuitive twist that Dunning himself has emphasized in the years since the original paper. The Dunning-Kruger effect is not just a story about incompetent people being overconfident. It is a story about learning, and it has a shape. Imagine your knowledge of a subject as a journey. At the very beginning, you know nothing, so you have no opinion either way. Then you learn a little, enough to feel like you are getting it, enough to connect a few dots, and your confidence spikes sharply. You feel like you understand, but you do not understand how much you do not understand yet. This is the peak that researchers sometimes call the peak of Mount Stupid. You are at your most confident before you are anywhere near competent. Then something happens. You keep learning. And the more you learn, the more you realize how complex the subject actually is, how many layers there are, how many exceptions, how many edge cases, how many things that seemed simple turn out to be anything but. Your confidence drops. Sometimes it drops dramatically. You feel like you are going backwards, like you understood it better before you knew more, but you are not going backwards. You are developing what researchers call metacognitive awareness, the ability to accurately assess the limits of your own knowledge. You are becoming competent enough to see incompetence, and then if you keep going, something else happens. Your confidence begins to climb again, but differently this time. Not spiking recklessly upward, but rising steadily, grounded in actual experience, actual feedback, actual repeated contact with reality. This is the place genuine experts live. Not in total certainty. Actual experts almost never claim total certainty, but in calibrated confidence. Knowing what they know, knowing what they do not know, and being honest about the difference. The tragedy of the Dunning-Kruger effect is not that incompetent people are confident. It is that the path out of incompetence requires you to pass through a valley of self-doubt that most people never enter willingly. It is much more comfortable to stay on the peak, to keep feeling like you understand, to avoid the information that would complicate your picture. Researcher Thomas Chamorro-Premuzic, who has spent years studying the relationship between confidence and competence in leadership, found that the qualities most likely to get someone promoted, assertiveness, decisiveness, the ability to project certainty under pressure, are almost entirely unrelated to the qualities most likely to make them actually effective once they are in charge. Organizations routinely select for the Dunning-Kruger peak. They reward the people who feel most certain, and then they wonder why their leaders keep making the same avoidable mistakes. So what do you do with this? Knowing about the Dunning-Kruger effect does not automatically exempt you from it. Dunning himself has written about this directly. The effect does not disappear when you learn its name. Your blind spots, by definition, are the things you cannot see, but there are things that help. Actively seeking out people who disagree with you, not to defeat them, but to understand what they are seeing that you are not. Measuring your predictions against outcomes over time, building a track record of your own accuracy that you are forced to confront. Sitting with uncertainty instead of resolving it prematurely. Saying the words "I don't know," not as a defeat, but as a form of intellectual honesty that most confident people never manage. And perhaps most importantly, learning to read the signal that your confidence itself might be sending you. When you feel most certain, When a judgment arrives fully formed, without doubt, without hesitation, that is not necessarily a sign that you are right. It might be a sign that you have not yet encountered the information that would change your mind. The wisest people you have ever met were probably not the most confident ones in the room. They were the ones who asked the most questions, who paused before answering, who said, "That's a good point," when challenged, and meant it. They had been through the valley. They knew what was on the other side. You think you are a pretty good driver. Maybe you are. But the fact that it feels true, the fact that it feels obvious, is not evidence. It never was. The only thing it is evidence of is that your brain is working exactly the way a brain works, and now you know something your brain did not want you to find out.